Good evening, Glenn. I'm sending you this story because something happened to me that, to this day, I still don't know how to process. It wasn't anything like someone appearing in front of me or anything like that. It was more one of those strange things that leave you thinking about it for days. I've been driving long-distance buses for years up here in the north. I won't say the company or the exact route because that just leads to gossip. But it's a normal route. The kind that leaves in the late afternoon or evening and arrives in the early morning or at dawn. Most passengers sleep, everything stays calm, maybe one or two quick stops and that's it. Honestly, the job is repetitive. What changes are the people, the suitcases, and sometimes a mechanical issue, but other than that, it's routine. That particular day was a normal trip. We left with the bus almost full. I had my assistant with me, because on those routes you really need someone watching the luggage compartment, checking tickets, keeping track of passengers getting on and off, and handling whatever comes up. We hit some rain here and there, nothing serious, and the highway was fine. No close calls, no sudden braking, nothing. We arrived at our destination around 6 in the morning, just as the sky was starting to lighten. Like always, you open the doors, turn on the interior lights, and people start getting up with sleepy faces. They rush off, some heading to work, others making connections to another bus. It's that moment when everyone's in a bad mood, but it's normal. And it's also when all your responsibilities pile up, making sure no one is left asleep inside, that nothing is forgotten, that the luggage compartment is empty, and that the bus is ready for the next departure. My assistant and I followed the usual procedure. He went down to open the luggage compartment and started pulling out suitcases, and I stayed upstairs for a bit because there's always someone who takes too long, someone asking questions, or someone who thinks they lost their phone. That day, everything was normal. A woman swore her purse was missing, and in the end she had it on her shoulder. A young guy asked if we had arrived at a certain city while he was already stepping off the bus. Nothing unusual. Once the last passenger got off, my assistant signaled to me from below. He said, "Hey, there's a suitcase left." At first, I thought it was one of those cases where someone leaves it while going to the restroom and comes back running. That happens a lot. But several minutes had already passed. The terminal was busy. People were dispersing. So I got down and saw it. It was a medium-sized suitcase, one of the hardshell types with wheels. Not new, but not falling apart either. Dark-colored, gray or black. And there was something that caught my attention. It didn't have any identification tag. No ribbon, no name, nothing. Just the suitcase itself. The first thing you do in those situations is ask around. My assistant went to the area where some passengers were still waiting for taxis or checking schedules. "Whose suitcase is this?" No one claimed it. Some looked over, others ignored him. As procedure, you notify terminal staff. A guard came over and asked if we had checked whether any passenger was still inside. We told him no. The bus was already empty. This is where it starts getting strange, but in a very ordinary way. The guard said, "Take it to Lost and Found. If someone claims it, they'll get it back." That's usually how it works, but my assistant is naturally suspicious. He said, "What if there's something bad inside? What if it's something we shouldn't be moving?" Because that happens too. Sometimes people leave things you don't want to touch. Strange smelling items, suspicious packages. So we did what made the most sense. Take it to Lost and Found. But first try to locate the owner through the usual way. My assistant checked the luggage list for what had been loaded into the compartment. On that list, you note how many pieces, roughly what they look like, and which ticket each baggage tag corresponds to. It's not perfect, but it helps. Right away, we noticed something odd. That suitcase didn't match anything on the list. There were backpacks, soft suitcases, boxes, but nothing like that hard gray suitcase. I said, maybe we just missed it. At departure time, when things are rushed, you can write something down wrong. We're not robots. But usually passengers have their baggage claim stub. If someone gets off without their suitcase, they're looking for it within minutes. That time no one came back. So we took the suitcase to Lost and Found. The man there looked at us like we were bringing him another problem. He said we had to fill out a form, describe the suitcase, and if possible indicate the seat number of the passenger. That's when we went blank. We didn't even know who it belonged to. The Lost and Found attendant asked, "Did you open it?" We said no because technically you're not supposed to. But sometimes when there's no way to identify the owner, it's opened carefully to look for something. A name, a paper, a receipt. Not to steal, but to find the owner. It happens at terminals more than people think. The guard was there and said it could be opened if the supervisor was present. So that's what we did. The man took out some keys and carefully opened the zipper. At first, nothing strange. Clothes, t-shirts, pants, underwear. Folded more or less normally. A sweater, a pair of jeans, a toiletry bag. Nothing unusual. What was strange was that the clothes looked old, like they had been stored for a long time. Not dirty, not stained, but like they had been sitting in a box for months. They had that closet smell. The inside of the suitcase smelled the same, like damp storage. At the bottom, in an inner pocket, we found what looked like a ticket. One of those small paper slips you sometimes forget inside. The man looked at it and said, "This isn't from today." I asked to see it, and that's when my skin started to crawl. It was from our bus line, yes. But not from that trip. It was from another date. And not from last week. It was from several years ago. The paper was yellowed. The print slightly faded. Like it had been stored somewhere humid. My assistant said, "Maybe someone just kept an old ticket inside." Sure, that's possible. But it wasn't just any ticket. It had the trip number, the seat number, and part of a passenger's name. Not the full name, but a last name. The Lost and Found attendant said, "Let me check the system." He pulled it up on the computer. We expected it to say no record because sometimes the system doesn't keep data that long. But he took longer than usual. He stayed quiet reading. Then he asked, "Do you know this passenger?" Of course not. We see hundreds of faces. Then he said something simple. No drama. But it left me cold inside. There's an incident record attached to that trip. I asked him to explain. He said, "There was an accident years ago. Not here at the terminal. On the highway. That trip was involved in a crash and there were fatalities." We went silent. You hear about accidents from other lines, other routes. But when someone tells you that with a specific ticket in hand, it feels different. I asked if the name on the ticket belonged to someone who died. He said he couldn't give details, but that yes, that last name appeared on the passenger list for that day. And the record was marked as deceased or unlocated. Something like that. I don't remember the exact term, but it was an internal company note. My assistant looked at me and quietly asked, "Then how did this suitcase get here?" And that was the question we couldn't answer. Logically, someone travels today, leaves a suitcase, and inside there's an old ticket they kept. That can happen. But what are the odds that the old ticket belongs to a trip with a fatal accident, on that same route, and is registered that way? It felt too specific. Like the suitcase belonged to that day years ago, not to today. The Lost and Found man tried to rationalize it. It could belong to a family member. Someone might have stored it. Someone could have found it and brought it. Yes, all possible. But then he asked something I hadn't considered. "What time did your bus arrive today?" We told him. "And what time did that old trip depart?" He checked. It was almost the same time. Same night route. Same early morning arrival. That's what unsettled me the most. The guard, already uneasy, said we should just close the suitcase and leave it there. If someone came with an exact description and proof, they could claim it. We closed it, filled out the form, went back to work, but I wasn't the same that day. On the drive back, I kept thinking about it. It wasn't fear. It was that feeling of something not fitting. Like when someone tells you something and your mind tries to arrange it logically but can't. Hours passed. No one claimed the suitcase. Not that day. Not the next. Not that week. I asked about it later when I returned to that terminal. I run that route often. "Still here?" the lost and found man said. I asked if they had opened it again to search for identification. He said yes. They checked thoroughly. No ID, no tags, no numbers. Just clothes. As if the suitcase belonged to someone who traveled. And that was it. But about a month later, on that same route, something happened that I couldn't rationalize so easily. It was another normal early morning. We arrived before sunrise. I stayed upstairs while my assistant opened the luggage compartment. I heard the compartment door open. Normal. Then my assistant called me in a serious tone I didn't like. The kind of low voice you use when you don't want to alarm anyone. "Hey, come down." I got down. The compartment was open. Dim yellow terminal light shining inside. Before I could ask anything, he said quietly, almost afraid, "There's someone hiding in there." And then I saw it too. At the back of the luggage compartment on the left side, exactly where that gray suitcase had been weeks earlier. There was something. Not clear. Just a crouched silhouette. Like someone squatting against the interior wall, trying not to be seen. And there was a smell. That same smell of old stored clothes. Stronger this time. I stepped forward. At that moment, he switched on the light. The compartment lit up completely. There was no one. Just the normal suitcases from that trip. The space where we had both seen that silhouette was empty. No boxes, no bundles. Nothing that could resemble a crouched human figure. We stared for several seconds. We checked thoroughly. Literally leaned halfway into the compartment. There's nowhere to hide. My assistant swore that before I came down, he noticed more detail. That the figure seemed to be wearing light-colored clothing, like an old shirt, and that the posture looked like it was holding something. I only saw the shape. We didn't have time to process it. Passengers had to get their luggage. We said nothing to anyone. When we closed the compartment, the smell disappeared completely. It never happened again. But since that early morning, every time we open the compartment before turning on the light, I don't approach as calmly anymore. I can't say it was the spirit of whoever owned that suitcase. I can't prove that. All I know is that the silhouette was exactly in the same spot where that gray suitcase had been forgotten weeks before. As if someone had come back looking for something. Or as if they had never truly left at all. We've finished story 1, The Secret in the Suitcase. We'll continue with story 2, Dangerous Lands. Good evening, Glenn. My name is Roger, and I work as a long-distance bus driver in northern Mexico. What I'm about to tell you happened a couple of years ago, on one of those stretches of road we all prefer to cross during the day and with company. It was an overnight route, inland, nothing like a comfortable highway. We left a mid-sized city at dusk heading farther north, with several hours of lonely road ahead of us. By the time we passed the last town, almost all the passengers were asleep. Silence. The occasional snore. The sound of the engine. The black road ahead. This may not matter to some people, but I did notice that most of my passengers were women, children, and maybe one or two young guys who didn't look older than 18. That added an extra weight of responsibility on me, and I know some of you will understand. For those of us who work up north, there's always one fixed concern: the bus breaking down in a bad area. It's not always the accident you fear. It's who might approach you while you're stranded on the road. There are plenty of stories, robberies, entire buses stolen, kidnappings. You learn not to stay still longer than necessary. But that night it happened. I was driving at a normal speed when, on a rough stretch of highway, I felt a hard pull on the right side and a loud bang. I managed to pull over with the hazard lights on. The passengers woke up frightened, but the bus stayed under control. I quickly checked that everyone was okay, and then got down with my flashlight. My heart pounding so hard it felt like my temples might burst. The problem was obvious. One of the rear tires had blown badly, and it had damaged part of the system. This wasn't a simple change-and-go situation. That bus wasn't moving on its own. I called the base by radio and phone. They told me what I already knew. The tow truck would take several hours because it was coming from a distant city. And at night, they advised me to stay calm, keep the passengers inside, and not leave the vehicle. I hung up and stood by the door for a moment, staring at the darkness of the highway. There wasn't a single light approaching. In that area, that wasn't reassuring. It was the opposite. Stranded on a deserted road, unable to move, we were an easy target. If a pickup truck with armed men passed by, there wasn't much we could do. I got back on the bus, reassured the passengers, and explained that a tow truck was on its way, and that the safest thing was to stay inside. Some complained, others resigned themselves and tried to sleep again. I turned off the interior lights and stayed in the driver's seat, staring through the windshield as a light drizzle began, and fog slowly started to wrap around everything. I don't know how much time passed. Half an hour. An hour. I was tense, expecting suspicious headlights at any moment. Then I jumped in my seat when I heard a soft knock on the door, like someone tapping with their knuckles. I checked the mirrors. Outside there was only darkness and fog. It happened again. 3 knocks. Not loud. Not weak. I gathered my courage and opened the door, expecting the worst. There stood a man. He was dressed in a white suit, well-pressed but old-fashioned in cut. He wore a white hat with a medium brim that cast a shadow over his face. He didn't look dirty. He didn't look drunk. He didn't look nervous. He seemed calm, as if he were standing in his own living room. "Good evening. I saw you were stopped. Is everything all right?" His voice was soft and kind. I hesitated, unsure whether to answer or shut the door in his face. But something about his tone, or the way he stood, calmed me. I glanced quickly back and saw that none of the passengers were awake. "A tire blew and caused more damage," I said. "A tow truck is coming, but it'll take a while." He nodded slowly. "Well, it's not a place to be alone. If you don't mind, I'll stay for a bit and keep you company so the weight doesn't feel so heavy. You can call me Don Lalo." I hesitated. There are stories about kind strangers who turn into robbers, but he carried nothing in his hands, no weapon, nothing threatening. And being alone in that cab with sleeping passengers behind me, I was afraid of that too. So I did something I normally wouldn't have done. I told him to come up and he sat in the passenger seat. The conversation started simple. He said that years ago he had worked on the road, though he didn't specify as what. He knew town names, stretches of highway, roadside food. I gradually relaxed. I noticed something strange while we talked. No vehicles were passing. It was as if that stretch of highway had been cut off from the world. Talking to Don Lalo eased my fear of being attacked. He didn't ask strange questions. He didn't ask how many passengers I had or how long the tow truck would take. He simply talked, as if companionship was the only purpose. At one point I offered him water. He declined politely. I found myself telling him things I rarely admit. That certain stretches of road scare me. That we pretend to be brave but know the risks. That my family wants me to stop driving nights but I can't because that's where the hours are. He listened carefully and said something that stayed with me. Not everyone who approaches you at night means you harm. Remember that. I don't know how long we talked. Eventually the cab began to look less dark, like the faint light before dawn. The fog outside seemed thicker, rolling across the road like smoke. Don Lalo stood up, adjusted his hat, and in the same soft tone he had introduced himself said, "It's almost time for them to arrive. I'll keep you company until here. From this point on, you won't need it." I told him to stay until the tow truck came, that we'd take him wherever he needed. But he shook his head gently. "My road goes another way." He stepped toward the door. I opened it and thanked him for the company. He calmly descended the bus steps. I leaned out to watch him better. I never clearly saw his face. Only his profile, the shadow of the hat, the light suit. He walked along the roadside without signaling, without turning around. His footsteps made no sound. The fog slowly swallowed him until he disappeared completely. I heard no vehicle, so I assume he didn't leave in one. Minutes later, like waking from a dream, I realized how strange it all had been. Not even 10 minutes passed before I saw the yellow lights of a tow truck approaching in the distance. I even let out a nervous laugh at how precise Don Lalo had been. I got down to meet the operator. He checked the damage and then looked at me seriously. "You were lucky. That blowout could have thrown you off the road. Did any pickup trucks approach? Did anyone bother you?" "No. Just a man in a white suit who stayed and talked with me for a while. He left walking just before you arrived." The tow truck driver looked confused. He said he had driven straight in and hadn't seen anyone on either side of the road. I almost insisted. Almost pointed toward where Don Lalo had walked. But I stayed quiet. The rest of the trip continued normally. Another company bus picked up the passengers in the nearest city. One young passenger, maybe 20 years old, approached me to ask if I was okay. I couldn't resist asking him something that had been bothering me. "Did you notice I was talking to someone during the night?" I asked, since he had been seated right behind me. He nodded. "Yes. I saw a man dressed in white. I thought he was another passenger and went back to sleep. Over time, I've tried to give it a logical explanation. Maybe he was just a traveler who disappeared into the fog. Maybe someone from a nearby ranch who knows shortcuts. But when I remember how he vanished into the mist without a sound, and how precisely he knew the tow truck was coming, it's hard to believe. I prefer to think that on a stretch of road where I expected the worst, a kind soul appeared. Someone who didn't come to rob or harm, but to sit and talk about food and roots, just so I wouldn't feel so vulnerable. Since then, whenever I pass that stretch, I slow down a little, honk once, and in my mind thank Don Lalo for keeping me company on what could have been one of the worst nights of my life. We'll end the video with story 3, Old Traditions. Good evening, everyone. My name is Carlos, and I've been a bus driver for about 35 years now. Tonight I want to tell you about something that happened to me back in 2007, on the highway from Bogota to Barranquilla, and that I still remember with a bittersweet feeling. First, a little context. I had a friend, a fellow driver on the same routes named Felipe. A lot of people in the business knew him back then. He was a cheerful man, always in a good mood. More than once he bought me a coffee, even when he didn't have much money on him. We met when I was just starting out, and he already had 15 years behind the wheel. I'm not exaggerating when I say he was like a mentor to me in this job. We shared plenty of early mornings at the bus terminal, checking tires and lights, joking around while we waited for departure time. He had a way of making everything feel lighter. Now, Felipe had his own unique way of greeting people on the road. Whenever he passed someone he knew, he'd flash his headlights twice short, once long, then honk the horn in a little melody we all recognized. Every time I heard it, I answered the same way. Unfortunately, Felipe died in a traffic accident, a bad rollover on a poorly marked curve. It hit all of us who knew him pretty hard. I remember getting the news and just staring off for a long time, unable to believe that the friend I associated with laughter was suddenly gone. Just like that, on one of the routes he'd driven so many times. The company held a small tribute. Several of us went to the wake, myself included. For a while, every time someone drove past the mile marker where the accident happened, they'd honk in his memory. Eventually, like most things in life, the sharpest pain faded. You keep working because there are bills to pay, and responsibilities waiting. Now we move ahead to 2007. It had just been 5 years since his death, and I happened to get assigned a trip from Bogota to Barranquilla. It wasn't the same route where he crashed. But that night, when I saw the assignment, I immediately thought of him. It was the kind of drive Felipe enjoyed. Quiet night, less heat, less traffic. As I was inspecting my bus before departure, I caught myself remembering little things. The way he complained about watered-down coffee at certain gas stations. The crude over-the-top jokes he'd tell just to get a laugh out of us. I guess I was feeling nostalgic, although I should clarify something. At that moment, I didn't remember that it was the anniversary of his death. That realization came later that night. I left around 10 at night with a full bus. Most of the passengers fell asleep right away, so the ride was quiet. The highway was clear, the sky pitch black, the white line on the asphalt guiding the way. I was serious but calm. Felipe drifted through my thoughts for a while. Then I pushed it aside and focused on the road. It must have been around 12:30 when it happened. I was in the right lane, moving at a good speed, when I saw the headlights of another bus approaching from the opposite direction. At first, I figured it was just another company's unit. Nothing unusual. But when it got closer, my chest tightened. Under the highway lights, I could clearly see that the bus coming toward me wasn't just similar to Felipe's. It was identical. Same make, same model, same paint job. Even the wear along the side stripe looked similar. I won't mention company names, but anyone who's worked in this field can recognize a specific unit at a glance. As the bus came closer in the opposite lane, my heart climbed into my throat. The headlights flashed in a pattern I knew by heart. 2 short bursts, 1 long. Exactly the same greeting Felipe always used. Not similar. Exactly the same. I froze for a couple of seconds, eyes locked on the road, but watching that bus approach out of the corner of my eye. Pure instinct. I lifted my left hand off the wheel for a second and returned the greeting, flashing my lights the way I always had. I didn't think about it. I just did it. At the same time, the other driver raised his hand too, with the same relaxed gesture Felipe used to make. I couldn't see his face clearly. Between the reflection on the glass, the darkness and the angle, all I caught was a silhouette with a cap tilted slightly forward. But the way he moved his hand, his posture in the seat, the way he tilted his head, it all felt too familiar. And then the horn sounded. It wasn't just any honk, it was the exact same sequence of tones Felipe always used as his greeting. I felt like someone had tightened a hand around my throat. Even so, I answered with my own horn, my hands almost shaking. The other bus finished passing me at full speed. I followed it in my side mirror and watched it drive away fast, until it was swallowed by the horizon behind me. It didn't vanish in some dramatic movie way, no smoke or anything like that. It was just there 1 second and then it wasn't. I kept driving in silence, my heart still racing. I didn't wake anyone up or say anything on the radio. I just kept going, eyes fixed on the pavement line, my mind spinning. At some point, almost without realizing it, I started speaking to him quietly, like he was sitting beside me. "If that was you, old man, thanks for the greeting. And if it wasn't, I still miss you. Sorry if that sounds overly emotional, even corny, but I really cared about that old man, and that night reminded me how much I regretted losing him." After driving for a while, I finally remembered the date, and what had happened started to make a certain kind of sense. I reached my first stop just before dawn. The place was calm. The passengers who were already awake got off to have breakfast. I stayed seated for a moment with the engine off. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Logically speaking, I can say that what I saw was a bus, just like Felipe's, driven by someone with very similar habits, and that at some point it simply disappeared from my sight. Maybe I misread a string of huge coincidences. Call it whatever you want. I admit that sounds reasonable. In fact, it's probably what I would say if someone else told me this story. But I know what I saw. I know how Felipe greeted people. I know how he honked that horn. And on the 5th anniversary of his death, on a route he loved, a bus identical to his passed me, greeted me the only way he ever did, and kept going until my mirrors couldn't reach it anymore. To me, that wasn't a coincidence. To me, that night a friend made himself present in the only way he could, the same way he did in life, with flashing lights, a horn blast, and a raised hand in the middle of the highway. And that's what I hold on to. The idea that wherever he is, he remembers those of us still out here on the road. And that once he took the time to pass by and say hello.